Welcome to Lumen, a podcast that sheds light on mental health, relationships, and what it means to be human. I'm Christopher Mooney, LCSW.
And I'm Kenyon Phillips, LMSW. Each episode, we unpack psychological patterns that affect our relationships. No jargon, no judgment.
Just thoughtful conversations to help you understand yourself and others a little more clearly.
Kat.
Kenyon.
I'm so excited you're here.
I'm so excited I'm here too.
You were far and away the greatest professor I had at Fordham. So the fact that you and Chris know each other, that the three of us are having this conversation now feels shared.
Yeah, it absolutely does. A lot of kismet going on, and thank you for your kindness. But I have to say, it's easy to be good at anything you're passionate about, and I'm just a total nerd for grief. So I was lucky that I did.
Tell us about being a nerd for grief. Tell us about you.
Well, I was not always a nerd for grief. I actually was a professional dancer for 17 years. And when my body started to be like, please don't do this anymore, I went to an organization in New York City called Career Transitions for Dancers.
Amazing.
And I took a bunch of aptitude tests through my union, and they were like, awesome. Okay, so you should be a PT, an OT, or a substance abuse counselor or therapist. And I was like, okay, substance abuse and therapy sounds like way too much peopling for me. So I'm going to go ahead and try to do PT/OT. And I just don't have a math or science brain enough for PT, but I thought OT, okay, this I can hit. So I started volunteering at Bellevue Hospital in New York in the OT department. And I got dinged a lot because what I wanted to do was talk about the people. Like I wanted to talk to them and find out what their life was like and what they had going on. And sort of inevitably, it started turning into everything around their injury, all the other complications. And so I would get in trouble for talking to them for too long, spending too much time getting to know them. That is always my downfall in terms of just being really fascinated by people. I'm really interested in getting to know people and what makes them tick and what makes them hurt. So I did that at Bellevue, and apparently that's a no for OT. But I was still pretty determined to go to school. And while I was waiting to hear after I applied to all these OT programs, I was working at a Trader Joe's in Danbury, Connecticut. At that Trader Joe's, they were building an inpatient hospice just down the road, which is now Regional Hospice of Western Connecticut, which is a phenomenal, phenomenal place full of love and grace. But anyway, my boss asked me to take the flowers that were left over at the end of the day and donate them to the hospice. And he's like, oh, listen, since you're going over there, you can take a tour. They're giving tours before they open it, and you can do it on the clock. So I was like, okay, stock fish in the freezer or tour a hospice. Hospice sounded to me like it smelled like urine and old people moaning. So it was not appealing. But it was so much better than the fish in the freezer because my back was hurting. So I was like, okay, I'm going to go ahead and take that tour.
Good call.
The tour was given to me by a social worker and two families who had used the hospice. And they were talking with such love and peace about the end of life experiences of their loved ones in this hospice. And I started to ask the social worker more and more questions about hospice work. And I kind of had a religious conversion, which is super strange for me. I have a very eclectic religious background. And at the end of the tour, I signed up to be a family support volunteer there. So
right then and there.
I did. Yeah, right then and there, even though I was already volunteering at Bellevue, planning to do this other career. But something about it for me just made sense to my heart. And I was like, this is it for me. So I signed up. I became a volunteer. I did like a 45-hour training with their bereavement coordinator. And I started helping to facilitate groups for people who lost a spouse to suicide, children who had lost a sibling, and children who had lost a parent. And through that work, I got even more into it. And I worked over the summer for their Good Grief Camp, which has some equine assisted therapy, which was really amazing to see for grief as well. But I just fell in love with the work. And like before that summer had even ended, I was looking around at schools, and Fordham had a hospice and palliative care fellowship program for the second year of the master's program. So it was actually the only program I applied to, and I got in and I went, and the rest was history.
Incredible. Incredible. And when you say palliative care, that reminds me, we have Chodo and Koshin in common, don't we? As does Chris.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about that connection.
And the Zen Center for Contemplative Care.
I started learning about the Zen Center pretty much right away when I started at Fordham, and I was voraciously reading any literature I could possibly find. But looking into the Zen Center, I mean, that would be, if I won the lottery, my dream would be to open a Zen Center for the pediatric palliative care program at New York Presbyterian, which I started, and that's at Choney, which has my heart. I love that program, but there is just not enough pediatric palliative care support anywhere. And you would think somewhere that like New York City would have it. But I feel like the Zen Center's approach, it's truly the unit of care is this entire family, and we're companioning them, we're partnering with them, we're walking with them on this whole very scary journey. And the way that the Zen Center does companioning is like no other. I mean, that I feel really is the dream, and tuning into the emotional, cognitive, spiritual, mental, educational needs of this entire family unit, that really is the way to go. And to be able to hold them up in the way that the Zen Center does, supporting them around a death loss, is really stunning. And that would be my dream anyway.
That's incredible.
It's an amazing dream.
Incredible.
Kat, can you tell us a little bit about, or maybe clarify, like palliative care and what that means?
Yeah,
like,
because we don't do jargon on the podcast. We want this to be accessible.
Yes, thank you. I'm really thrilled that you asked that question, because when people hear palliative care, they hear things like death squad, hospice, dying tomorrow, etc. So just to clarify, palliative care is it's care for the whole person and the whole family for anybody with a serious chronic illness. So no one has to have a terminal diagnosis to receive palliative care. It's inclusive care. If someone is providing it, it's something that's going to be covered as part of the hospital stay. It's an adjunct care. It's something that goes along with all the other teams that anybody might be working with, usually in a hospital setting, but there are more and more outpatient palliative care clinics as well. But primarily what palliative care does is they work on pain and symptom management for chronic, life-limiting, and serious illness, emotional support, and this is for the entire unit of care, the patient, and anyone they consider family, anybody who is part of their tribe. Those are the people that we're taking care of emotionally and helping and doing a lot of really grief education, because in this country, we don't do any grief education, and we're all terrified to talk about it.
Right.
It's one of those things that just makes us clam up or have the world's worst verbal diarrhea in front of someone who's experienced a loss, and then you just can't stop the words coming and it's awkward. So just giving some education about what to expect when you're expecting a death, that's a big part of palliative care, whether or not somebody who's on a palliative care service is at that point, but some people will be. And then helping to manage all the multiple teams that come with a chronic and serious illness, because usually that's not just one. I mean, if you have a cancer diagnosis, you might be working with oncology, and you might also be working with pulmonology or endocrine or many other different types of services. So what palliative care can do is help coordinate that, but also translate for patients and families what's happening. What are the actual options? Because sometimes, certainly in a medical setting like a hospital, doctors, specialists are so busy and they're going boom, boom, boom. In a teaching hospital, often you'll have a resident who's explaining to the family options or next steps. And it sounds like the Charlie Brown teacher, right? Like if people are speaking to you really fast and you're scared of the wah, 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 wah. It's like,
that's your second Peanuts reference, because before you talked about the Good Grief program.
Yes. Yeah. Well, what can I say? I'm a child of the 80s. So that's a really important piece of the work, is giving the whole family ideas about what might be coming and also how to support, which means community resources. Certainly, there are a lot of grief resources in the community. There are a lot of disease-specific resources, which is always a purview of social work. But then in terms of this coordination, making sure that all of the potential options are presented equally to a family if people are making decisions as a family unit, right. But also helping families figure out, how do you want to make this decision? Is this something you want to talk over with your spouse spouse, but not your kids? Is it something you would like the whole family to weigh in on? And what are going to be your end of life wishes? What do you want that to look like? Are you somebody who wants to be alive at any cost? Is that, and for some people, that's a value. Life at any cost. That's what I want. For some people, they say, you know what? If I couldn't do XYZ, if I couldn't move my legs, or if I couldn't speak, or if I couldn't breathe on my own, that would not be a quality of life that is valuable to me. So helping people figure that out is also a really big part of the job, because it's something we don't want to think about. Death is terrifying and we don't want to think about it or talk about it, but you really want to do that before you hit a crisis, because trying to have that conversation when you're in the middle of an emergency, that throws your whole body into a 4F response, that you just are absolutely flooded with stress hormones, and it's really hard to make decisions like that. We usually don't do our best. So being able to have those conversations in smaller bites, that's another thing palliative care can do, is just help facilitate that and facilitate all kinds of difficult conversations, because a lot of times with the stress of a serious illness or a terminal illness, it brings up a lot of family systems junk that gets in the way of relating to people. And one of the things we encourage in palliative care is the types of conversations that need to happen near to the end of someone's life. And a lot of those conversations have words like, I love you, I forgive you, please forgive me, and goodbye. So helping people to really prepare for that, that is the superpower of a palliative care team.
It's like a guide. It's and that's what I keep thinking of as you're explaining this. It's like the guide to kind of bring the family and the person who's passing away or end of life to that point, or to, kind of help them get to where they feel they can be the most comfortable.
Yeah, and addressing the individual needs as well as the collective needs, because there's, of course, practical needs are the things people think about first, right? Like, oh, we need a shower chair in our house, or we're going to need to have somebody come by and change a dressing or an IV or something like that. But then there's more practical things of, okay, now that this individual member of this family system is impaired in one way or another, what does that mean for the rest of the system? Generally, it means a lot of changes, role changes, responsibility changes, and those are sort of the lesser known things, but if we don't bring them out and talk about them, they can often cause a lot more stress amongst the family while they're trying to figure it out. And for all of us as humans, we make a lot of assumptions. We make a lot of assumptions about things that we don't talk about because it's scary. And death and illness are two of those. So actually having the conversation so that everybody's clear about what's going to happen next, and everyone is in agreement with, okay, this person is now going to take over this role, or while you're in the hospital, Amy is going to do your job, and this is who is going to take care of our kids and take them back and forth. And having a lot of those practical things acknowledged and decided ahead of time can really save families a lot of stress.
That's incredible. Like a logistics management system.
That's what it is. It's just another overlay of support mentally, clinically, and emotionally.
Right. A hugely important one. We're talking a lot about death. Tell us about different kinds of grief, different kinds of loss.
Yes, absolutely. So, as you know, Kenyon was one of my star students in my grief, loss, and bereavement class at Fordham University.
You hear that, Chris?
I did hear that. You've gotten your perfection.
Yeah, it's so true. But one of the things that blows students away that we generally talk about on the first day of class is that grief is not reserved for death. And this is one of those things that often people say is just mind blown, right? Because grief is experienced anytime we have a loss. And human beings, we have losses all the time. And not just adult humans, children too, which is always why when I'm explaining, I often give talks about how to talk to children about death and loss. And generally speaking, parents and caregivers are so nervous to talk to their kids. They're afraid they're going to traumatize them. They're afraid to give them the information because they think they're protecting them. But generally speaking, children sense so much more than they let on, and they do much better with just concrete information. And that's around death loss, but other losses too. So what does that mean? What are other losses that cause grief?
Yeah, what do those look like?
Divorce or a romantic breakup causes a huge amount of grief and loss. Something like retirement. also can cause an incredible amount of grief. It's an identity loss and shift. It is stage of life change. And for many people, that's very scary. Empty nesters, a lot of my practice is empty nesters trying to figure out, because that's an identity loss. You were a day-to-day caregiver as a parent or a guardian, and now that the children have left the nest, which is the goal, we want them to do that.
Yeah.
There's a huge sense of emptiness and who am I now? So loss of identity, loss of routine, driving the kids to all of their activities, things of that nature. And that's a big loss and grief. Grief comes up for all of those things. And grief in divorce or a romantic breakup, of even when the split is good for both people, even when it's amicable, there's still so much loss there, because it means a loss of shared dreams, the loss of hopes of a future.
And those
the
memories, the whole lifestyle that has been shared.
The whole lifestyle.
Yeah, it's a loss of the structure too, right? And
Yes.
kind of just in life as we know it. And that's, I think of as like, it's just anything that changes life as we know it, I would imagine can be internalized as grief or loss.
Absolutely. And that's such a great way to put it, because that speaks to something called the loss of the assumptive world. And this is something I think a lot of us deal with all the time. And the idea that a major loss, something that we truly grieve, is we thought the world was one way, and an event or a series of events makes us look and see everything differently. It's the type of event that makes us have a before and an after. A lot of people talk about a sudden death loss that way. But what people talk about is the feeling that the world is not what they thought it was. And this can be deeply unsettling. And there's a lot of grief there. Sometimes it's a loss of safety. It's a loss of trust. And a lot of that can happen, like in the current political climate, there is a lot of political grief.
Absolutely.
Where people on both sides, we're becoming more and more divided. And on both sides, people are feeling they're losing their relationship with their family members because they are not who they thought they were. And with this ideology on very opposite sides of the fence, people are feeling like, well, now my whole relationship is in question. If this person believes X and I am vehemently against X, what does that mean about our relationship? And does that change our relationship moving forward? But does it also change all of my past memories of the way we interacted? And the grief of feeling like we all believed that our neighbors thought very similarly to ourselves, and now we're understanding that that just isn't true, that there are a lot of people who do think what we think. But I think almost everyone I know has been shocked or surprised by someone either in their family or their circle of friends who is very much has an opposing view politically. And that causes a lot of grief. It causes loneliness. It causes isolation. It causes definitely separation in terms of emotional intimacy, because there's now a barrier that there wasn't before.
Right.
And all of that causes quite a bit of grief. So as a country, we are dealing with a lot of grief right now.
Yeah. Kat, we did a podcast on community, I think a few weeks ago, in connection. And I think that's a lot, it comes up a lot in our conversations. And that's what I hear you kind of talking about, is this, we have, we go through this grief and this loneliness. I mean, right now it's related to a lot of the political environment and what people believe. And we suddenly, I think, we have this loss of connection with others. And you mentioned it starts to make us feel really alone. And I think that becomes a really toxic and kind of harmful feeling to experience. And that grows. So a lot of what we've been looking at is like the importance of connection and kind of pushing through that. But it sounds like that might actually, tie into kind of helping deal with grief too, and loss, and feeling more connected, or trying to feel more connected and push towards that.
Absolutely. And I think connection is the antidote for almost anything that ails us emotionally.
Amazing. Yeah.
Certainly for grief is, and then sometimes it means finding new ways to connect to a person who is a consistent person in our lives. But sometimes it means replacing that connection with somebody different if it turns out that the ideology is different. And that in sort of grief terms is relocating the bond. And that's important, because when we've relied on a certain set of people and one is no longer available for whatever reason, for death, for divorce, for opposing political views, then whatever they provided to us relationally, now we have a hole there.
Right.
Right.
It's a gap. And we need to find a new way to fill that gap. And that is something that's actually awesome, because that we have control over. If we are able to recognize our losses and identify them as losses, then it gives us the freedom and the space to reimagine how to fill that with something that fills us.
That's incredible.
There's so much agency in that.
Yeah.
If we're not afraid of, then you get stuck. Like, people get stuck. Like, what do I do here? What do I do now? Or we've talked about maladaptive behaviors. That's where they kind of slide in sometimes, right? And people might start to find or fill that hole or that gap with alcohol,
with substance, drugs. Or What does relocating look like? Can you give me an example of it?
Sure. Well, so the idea of grief in the past was to get on with life, move on from it, get over it. These were the ideas of grief. And we don't necessarily think that that's healthy anymore. The old Kubler-Ross model, the DABDA, all of that. Kubler-Ross's research was all done on people who were dying, not people who were losing someone they love. So that's a little different. That's preparatory grief. For someone who's dying, that's preparatory grief. But for people who are watching someone they love die, that's anticipatory grief. And they're different. They certainly share similarities, but they are different. So in terms of modern grief theory, the one that I really love is by Strobe and Shute. And it's this model where it's called the dual process model. And it looks like a mess, which is why I love it. If you look at a diagram of it, it just back and forth and all kinds of lines all over it, because grief is inherently very, very messy. And the idea is that dealing with grief is a vacillation between loss and restoration. So what does that mean practically? It means some of the time we are honoring that grief. We are feeling the loss. We are crying. We are reminiscing. We are working through to actualize the loss, to accept that this loss has happened. And then part of the time we're working on restoration, on rebuilding ourselves in the face of this loss. And that can look like distraction. Distraction gets a bad rap. Distraction has a place in grief. We have to be able to use it sparingly, because what we need as humans is dosing in grief. We can only take so much grief at any point in time, and our brains will give us an amount of grief, which is where you get what people describe as the wave. It just hits you, it knocks you over. You have this very intense affective wave of grief,
right?
And then it dissipates until the next one comes. So in the dissipation of this wave, then we have some more energy to be able to say, okay, how do I stay connected to this person? And that's something that's a newer concept. It's called the continuing bonds theory. And a lot of people believe that that is now a healthy way to grieve. And what does that look like?
What does that look like? I was just going to say.
That looks like wearing the necklace of your beloved grandmother who died. So you have a physical connection, almost a transitional object, something to physically touch to remind you of your connection. For some people, it's celebrating the birthday of someone they've lost and having a ritual, lighting a candle. For some people, I know a Jewish family who's lost a child. So for Shabbat, every week, they light a candle at the place of the child who passed. So that ritual of honoring and ongoing connection, it's that they are still part of this family, although they're part in a different way.
Right.
For many people, it's learning how to maintain the relationship. It's the book Tuesdays with Morrie has a quote in it that death ends a life, not a relationship. And that's sort of the basis for the continuing bonds theory. So how do you maintain relationship with someone who's dead? How do you do that? Well, one way is to carry some of their physical things with you to be able to touch them. One way is to carry their ideological things with you. It's if it was important to them, if they ran a 5K for the American Heart Association, is doing a walk or donating money to a cause that was important to them. If somebody who has passed, it was their wish was to climb Machu Picchu, then you and your family training to be able to do it in their stead and in their honor. For some people, it's finding ways to continue to communicate. And a lot of people, when I say that in practice, look at me like I have 5 heads, because it sounds like, am I asking them to do a seance? No. What I mean by that is being able to continue to communicate with your person in a way that feels natural. So some people think thoughts to their person. Some people speak to them aloud. I have someone who lost their mom and they were very close to them. So they'll talk to them while they drive and be like, Mom, this happened today, da da da. And people will say to me early on in this process of figuring out how to have a continuing bond, but isn't it crazy if I'm like talking to them out loud? It's like they're not going to answer. True, fair point. But a lot of times, if this is a loved one who is very close to you, people say, I don't know what they would say. And my response is, really? Really? If you ask a question or you tell them something that's going on in your life, if you close your eyes and imagine what they tell you, do you really have no idea? Because most of the time, we do. In our intimate relationships, we know people well enough to have a good idea of what they might say.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, so being able to allow your knowledge of them to continue to provide comfort to you in the moments when you need them. And for many people, that also looks like prayer. It also looks like a lot of times for New Year's or for death anniversaries, I have people write a letter to their loved ones about the things that they miss or the things happening in their life. And I'm a big fan of dissolving paper. You can buy it on Amazon. You don't need to be a therapist to get this stuff. And you write this letter and then you take it and watch it dissolve in the ocean. And some people feel that that's sort of putting it out to spirit or universe if
Right.
that follows with their belief system. So finding ways to stay connected. I know a family who one of the parents died and the remaining parent used the parent who passed's clothes to make a quilt. There's a company called College Quilts where you can send them all these clothes and they will create a quilt of your loved one's clothing. So you can literally wrap yourself in their old clothes.
Oh, that's incredible.
That is so incredible.
Yeah.
So, Kat, I'm a couple of things are coming to mind. One, and I just think this idea of still communicating with our lost, loved one, it's just so beautiful. Like that idea of like being able to carry on a conversation, or from our own perspective, and kind of honoring their memory and the relationship. I think that's the takeaway is how do we honor that relationship that we had with them? And then the other thing that was going through my mind was this idea of culturally, even within the U.S., like, we've joked about having Italian heritage and,
Right.
The just different backgrounds and family cultures and the systems, how much we avoid talking about this or
Yep.
even bringing up, hey, we talked a little bit about like in the palliative process, avoiding those conversations before it happens, but then even afterwards, how hard is it for people to even acknowledge and just speak about this loss or even to have those conversations in their mind? I'm wondering how many barriers you see
Cause that grief illiteracy
Yeah.
kind of in our country.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the biggest barrier here is fear, right? As humans, that's our fear. We're afraid of death. We're afraid of our own. We're afraid of the death of everyone we love. And it's just sort of crazy that we live this life accepting the idea, knowing that we're all going to die and everybody we love is going to die. And we take that information and we stick it in a box in the back of our head. And that every time a death comes up, kind of anywhere, on television, even in a movie, in a book, in a cartoon, it triggers a little something in us. We get that little sense of unease. Death makes us very uncomfortable. We don't know how to talk about it. And there's an ethos, I think, in our society that, like, if we don't talk about it, it won't happen, which is much stronger in many other cultures who believe that if you openly speak on death, you're kind of calling it to you. So there
Really?
is certainly a cultural component where that is taboo and it feels protective not to talk about death. But in our American culture, it's not so spelled out. It's just that it's not considered polite conversation. But that's because we're terrified and we don't have language to talk about grief. Most of us are very grief illiterate.
What do you think happens if we start to talk about it? What would happen if we actually invited the conversation?
Every time I have invited the conversation, it's been transformative. I think getting across the threshold of fear to acknowledge and accept that we are going to die, everyone we love is going to die, and that talking about it is going to make it a little bit easier, I think that opens a space for a deep breath, because I think we just emotionally and physically hold our breath around death and grief and just like wait for conversations to be over. We want to ignore it. We want to push it down. We don't want to talk about it because we're so afraid of the pain. And that doesn't protect us from that pain when it happens. So being able to have language to talk about grief and space to talk about it is so incredibly freeing. And for most people who are able to get over that ledge of fear, there is an incredible amount of relief, but also community. Because if we're all honest about the losses we have experienced and we're going to experience, we have so much more in common with each other and can give us so much more empathy for other people's losses and situations. It's really beautiful, actually. I think talking about grief is beautiful and actually brings us closer together.
That's incredible.
It's that vulnerability.
It's
right?
totally the vulnerability paving the way for connection.
That's right. Pushing into the fear. And I think that's so true for everyone, not just people that we work with, but just for human beings. If we push into those vulnerable spaces,
totally. And listening to you, Kat, and you, Chris, talk about this, I realize not only is talking about death taboo, that kind of loss, but talking about any kind of loss, really, people don't want to go there, and yet that's what I eat. That's what I survive on. It's like, I hate small talk. I can do it. I'm from LA. But like I want to go there with people. And you mentioned the curiosity you had about your patients in Bellevue, you know, and wanting to get, but like having these conversations, not only about death and that kind of a loss, but, you know, I experienced loss when grad school was over. I was killing myself doing grad school. I was like, oh my God, I can't, I'm not going to survive this. And finally I did survive it, and it was over. And then there was this huge, weird shift, and I got depressed, but I felt like I couldn't talk to anybody about it.
Right. Because it didn't seem right. It didn't seem to align with, well, you just graduated, you have a master's degree now, you got your license, you know, it's all of these successes, but there's a hole. There's still a shift. There's still a change in purpose and identity. And I think that's what we look at with this, is like or the way I look at it is like, anytime we have a shift in our purpose or a shift in our identity, it's really, we have to acknowledge that. We have to step back and say, hey, let me pay a little attention, be mindful of what just happened, so that I can then move forward into the next phase.
Loss really frames that beautifully for us, because it as you say, it forces us to sort of like pause.
Mm-hmm.
I also think it's really interesting that, you know, we always want to isolate loss as grief, but also kind of keep it in its own box in the corner. And in my experience, just as a human, but also as a clinician, loss is always messy. And sometimes, you know, loss is never all bad. There is usually something that is good about it, even if the good in a situation is that the person is no longer suffering, and that there's relief. Although for many loved ones, that causes an incredible amount of guilt. They feel like they should only be sad. And if they have any feelings of relief, then they're being a bad wife or daughter or parent or whatever.
Right.
But the idea that some amazing accomplishments can cause grief, I think if more people understood that, we'd beat ourselves up less. You know, there's this idea of like, I just graduated. Why aren't I happy?
Right.
I just got married. Why aren't I happy? I finally got pregnant. Why aren't I happy? Or, you know, the idea of an outstanding personal achievement, like I guess like winning an Olympic medal.
Right.
There's grief there, because if you have dedicated your entire life, your purpose, your focus to this one event, and it's over, that's a huge loss. It is now a shift in identity. If you decide you're going to go pro, or you're going to go consider that maybe you want to go back for another Olympics, what do you do next? It's a loss of direction, a loss of focus, a loss of routine, and a loss of identity as someone striving to do X, Y, Z. Once you do it, okay, now what? If you're someone striving for something and then you achieve it, you're no longer someone striving for that. and it takes away that piece of who you are, and that drive and desire guides your days. And if you don't have it anymore, it can leave a lot of people feeling really lost, and that is a type of grief.
It also brings up the fact that so many of us are afraid of change and grief and loss especially. It really engenders change. You can't turn away from the fact that there's a change here.
It's constant.
Yeah.
I worked with one of my friends and a psychiatrist that I worked with. She said the only constant in life is change.
Yeah.
And I was like, wait a second. And it doesn't make sense, but it makes perfect sense. But that's, we have to lean into that idea that things are constantly changing. And if you achieve something, then that's marked, but that's just a moment in time that's marked.
Right.
So whether you get a gold medal or you win a race or, something happens, it's a marked moment. And then we have to be able to continue. It doesn't stop. We don't stop at that point. Right. Life doesn't stop at that point.
Right. And that in all changes, there is an inherent loss, because once something changes, it's no longer the way it was before, whether it's for good or for bad. And in that change is grief. It is inherently there. There's nothing we can do, which I think is part of why we're all so afraid of change. We're afraid of the grief. Mm-hmm. But I think once we understand and feel like we have some tools to actually tolerate it and understand it and figure out how to make that grief fit into our life in the best way possible, I think that can really help us to move forward.
Like, what are some ways that we can learn from other cultures about how to do just that without being appropriating assholes?
Other cultures, a lot of, like, the first thing that comes to mind for me is Dia de los Muertos, because it is such a beautiful tradition of honoring ancestors and acknowledging death and bringing death out into the open, but also not making it a somber event, that there is joy in celebrating the life of these ancestors. Another tradition I really love, which I believe is a Southeast Asian tradition, it is coming to the graves of the people that you love and bringing incense, bringing flowers, and having time to sit there and share a meal around this space. That is a way of continuing a bond, like we were talking about. And those continuing bonds are very special to me. There are some cultures who also believe that when someone comes to you, a person who's died, in a dream, that is an actual visitation with information for us. And what if we decided it was? What could that mean for the bond? What does it mean for the griever to be able to take that? Another thing that I find really interesting that comes across cultures is that people are so often looking for signs. I want my loved one to bring me a sign. And that for many people, that type of continuing bond is so powerful.
It's meaning making, right?
It is. It's a type of meaning making, and meaning making is a way to transmute grief into something that offers us space for growth and resilience. So meaning making in that way can be so beautiful. I'm thinking right now of a family who lost a child, and before the child died, they agreed with the child that their sign would be a rainbow. So now every time anyone in this family sees a rainbow, they take a picture of it, of course, and text it to each other. And they all feel connected to each other and connected to the person that they lost. And now they see rainbows everywhere. So also when they're feeling like they really miss their person, they say, like, God, please send me a rainbow. And then inevitably, they will find a rainbow somewhere, whether it's a rainbow on some backpack they see on a kid getting out of the bus, or it's an actual rainbow. And that rainbow, when they see it, feels like connection. It feels like the bond is maintained, and that although the person is no longer here on earth the way they were, that they are still somewhere, and that the connection is still strong. And that provides so much comfort.
That's incredible.
It's so moving. I'm tearing.
I'm getting teary.
I'm looking. We're both like kind of just the idea of the rainbow and the being able to have that conversation ahead of time and pick the sign, pick that what's going to have so much meaning for the rest of everyone else's life.
Yeah,
it's so it is. I have so many mixed emotions. Actually, it's
transformative.
This concludes part 1 of Good Grief, our conversation with grief, loss, and bereavement therapist Kat Hurley. Stay tuned for part 2. We're just getting started. Thanks for listening to Lumen. If today's conversation resonated with you, we encourage you to follow, review, and share Lumen with anyone you think would appreciate it.
We'll be back soon with another conversation designed to bring a little more light to the human condition. I'm Christopher Mooney, LCSW.
And I'm Kenyon Phillips, LMSW.
Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other. Lumen is for educational and informational purposes only and is not a substitute for therapy, diagnosis, or treatment. If you're experiencing a mental health crisis, please contact local emergency services or a trusted mental health professional.